Sit the fuck down, class. Today we're talking about the Wright brothers. Everyone knows the big amazing thing they did in 1903, which continues to be the bane of my existence to this day, but a lot of people don't know about the very interesting set of subplots in this tale surrounding Samuel Langley and the Smithsonian Museum. So strap on your goggles, tape a picture of your partner to your cockpit, and ponder on the likelihood of your death as we take this plunge into the early days of aviation. Orville and Wilbur Wright started off as bicycle shop owners in the 8th circle of hell known as Ohio. When they started, they were mostly riding off the fad of the newfangled bicycles from England that didn't look like they were custom designed to kill their riders, but the entire time they spent making and repairing bicycles, they felt like they could do something much bigger. They wanted to invent the first flying machine. Wait a minute, that's not exactly correct. See, the Montgolfier brothers in France had already invented the hot air balloon, presumably as they tried desperately to distract themselves from all the guillotines that people were starting to build. So, the Wright brothers wanted to invent Wait, yeah, this one too wasn't quite technically an accurate statement either. See, in 1804, Sir George Cayley invented the first glider, and it even had separate systems for lift and control. Okay, fine. Yeah, I got bad news. Samuel Langley, Aerodrome number 5, 1898. It flew under its own power, but it had no directional control and was also unmanned.
Oh my god. It even has a watermark.
This would not be the last of Samuel Langley though, so remember his name. He comes up later in this story. Right, I think we've finally crossed out all the weird exceptions and edge cases here, so we can finally move on with the video. Orville and Wilbur Wright set out to create the first manned flying machine capable of directional control. Editing Pip, did I miss anything? Thank fuck. By 1900, they packed up shop and moved to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and over the course of the next 3 years, they set to work inventing a machine that would drain money directly out of my wallet with ruthless efficiency. They invented the airplane. You all know they invented the airplane. I'm not rehashing the entire process of how they invented the airplane because there's a far less well-known part of the story that I want to share here today. Remember Samuel Langley from approximately 45 seconds ago? Yeah, he was testing his own aircraft at the exact same time as the Wright brothers. The difference between the two sets of inventors, though, was the fact that Sam Langley had a massive warehouse in Washington, D.C., and the equivalent of $1.4 million of funding in today's money. Not to mention, he also owned the fucking Smithsonian. Yes, the Smithsonian. The entire Smithsonian. That was Samuel Langley's property. On October 7th, 1903, Sam Langley had completed what he thought would be the first successful design of an airplane. And like any old money rich kid with aerospace contracts and far too much public trust, he crammed his assistant into the machine and attempted to launch it off of a houseboat on the Potomac River. Now, this machine made it shakily off the launch boat for about 100 yards. After that, though, the thing fucking nosedived into the Potomac, with the assistant still in it. Newspapers reporting on it stated that there was no way in hell this could, in any way, be deemed a flight. So, an infuriated Samuel Langley did what most rich aerospace failures do, reloaded his launcher with another aerodrome creation, and decided to try again in front of an even larger crowd of spectators the next month, on December 8th, 1903. When that happened, however, the airplane didn't even make it 100 yards this time. It flew off the launcher, did a half somersault, as the papers called it, and nosedove immediately into the water again, earning this machine the press-assigned nickname of Langley's Folly. Not 9 days later, the Wright brothers had not one, but multiple successful flights of their Wright Flyer. And when word of this flight finally got around to Langley, he became
very fucking furious.
So fucking furious, in fact, that he'd crawl into a hole and die of cope only 3 years later. This would not, however, be the last they'd see of Langley's rage. In the meantime, as they tried to grow their business, they discovered that a new challenger had stepped into the hell of a cell that was the early aviation industry. Glenn Curtiss saw what the Wright brothers had done, took furious notes, and set about creating the Curtiss Aircraft Company in 1909. Now, Glenn Curtiss was a smart man. He had read the Wright brothers' patents first. The Wright brothers used a method of aircraft control called wing warping, which physically twisted the entire wing of the airplane like a bird in order to make the thing roll to the left and right. Curtiss knew that if he'd used this control schema, he'd be in violation of the Wright brothers' patents. So, he created a new and honestly better method of roll control. The aileron, an independent control surface on the wing that would rotate up or down instead of attempting to rotate the entire fucking wing like a dumbass. The aileron was a hit. In fact, to this day, the aileron is still how roll on any fixed-wing aircraft works. The Wright brothers saw this Curtiss Aircraft Company, saw that Glenn Curtiss had technically still used the same principle of flight as the winged warping, and then proceeded to make the dumbest series of mistakes in their lives by saying, fuck it, we're going to sue Glenn Curtiss anyway. This marks the point where the American aviation industry stopped making airplanes for a while and instead decided to produce lawsuits. The legal battles themselves are incredibly stupid and repetitive, so we're going to cut to the part where the Wrights bankrupted themselves, only for the courts internationally to be mixed. The German courts said that the Wrights didn't have a case because
You cannot just copyright the principle of physics. Das ist ridiculous. Yodel yodel.
The French, however, ruled in the Wright brothers' favor, and the US courts ordered Curtis to pay royalties to the Wrights and merge the two companies into the Curtiss-Wright Corporation in 1922. But by that point, both participants had become so bankrupt by the legal battle that the Curtiss-Wright Aircraft Company was worth essentially nothing, making it cheap enough for Glenn Curtiss to just buy back anyway. Curtiss, after all, started this thing with way deeper pockets than the Wrights did. So Orville Wright, having litigated both his own company and the other Wright brother into an early grave, decided that the best thing to do would be to just fucking quit the aviation business for a while and try to invent some other things instead, taking his time to step away from the headache that aviation had become for him. The blissful retirement from aviation didn't last too long, though. Remember Samuel Langley from earlier? Yeah, he'd croak before those lawsuits could start, but he did own the Smithsonian, and after his death, Langley's very good friend, Charles Walcott, took control of the Smithsonian Institute, and like any disgraced rich kid with an axe to grind and a major means of communication, he decided to engage in a little bit of historical revisionism. Walcott rebuilt one of Langley's old designs. He then headhunted Glenn Curtiss to test pilot this design, knowing that Curtiss too was more than done with Orville Wright's bullshit. Curtiss then signed a letter saying that the old Curtiss model was, in fact, capable of flight. It was the launcher that was wrong, and this gave the Smithsonian all they needed to feel justified in putting the Langley Buzzard in the Smithsonian Museum in 1925 with a plaque on it that read,
"The first man-carrying aeroplane in the history of the world capable of sustained free flight. Invented, built, and tested over the Potomac River by Samuel Pierpont Langley in 1903.
This, of course, thoroughly pissed off Orville Wright. He first retaliated by sending the original Wright flyer to be housed in a museum in London, England. This, rightfully, was taken as a grave insult to the Smithsonian and a stain on the American spirit by the wider public. This insult was taken to be so grave, in fact, that the federal Congress started to sit Walcott down for congressional hearings on the matter. The federal government did not want the first of a world-changing American invention to be housed in fucking England. So, 3 years later, Walcott, at death's door, came back to Orville Wright with a deal. The Smithsonian would remove the false plaque from the Langley exhibit if, and only if, Orville Wright made a public statement that the Langley machine would have been capable of flying under its own power if not for the launcher. Orville Wright did not take the deal, and he proceeded to not take the deal all the way until 1942 when, after years of intense scrutiny from academia and the American public, the Smithsonian Museum was forced to cave, remove the plaque, and offer up a pedestal in their museum to hold the Wright flyer with all the respect it deserved. Unfortunately, the Second World War was kinda still on at that point, so the plane couldn't be brought out from the concrete bunker it had been stored in. And even more unfortunately, Orville Wright himself would not live to see the day where it was restored to its rightful place in the Smithsonian Museum. He died of a heart attack in January of 1948, 11 months before the Wright flyer made it home. He may not have lived to see his aircraft in the museum where it belonged, but Orville Wright did outlive Samuel Langley. He also outlived Glenn Curtiss and Charles Walcott, whose name barely anybody remembers. He lived to watch the speed of aircraft change drastically from his first flight of 7 miles an hour to the successful test of the Bell X-1 that broke the sound barrier. That's right, Orville Wright was alive for that. Orville may have absolutely fumbled the bag with his endless litany of lawsuits for sure, but at the end of the day, he outlived all the thorns in his side, and got the American public to back him up. So if you at home are like me and can't find a reason to keep on going, just remember, you have to live at least long enough to see your enemies perish. That's a positive message, right? Who cares? Thanks for watching. You all have been wonderful. I've been Pip. Have a good one.